Through the decades, Apple's been through many different looks, each with their own distinct vibe and aesthetic. Today, we'll be taking a look at each era of Apple's design language regarding branding, products, and UI design. For the sake of the video, I'm skipping all the pre-Steve Jobs years of the company, and I'm starting right after Jobs rejoined the team in 1997. This brings us to the first era of Apple, the Aqua Era. The Aqua Era is what you probably think of as Apple's revival. After rejoining the company in 1997, Steve Jobs basically brought it back from the dead, creating one of the most beloved and iconic periods in Apple's history. The Aqua Era spans from around the year 2000 to 2007. Some of the defining features of this era was its jelly, glossy, water-like look and feel, hence the name Aqua. The macOS versions spanning this time period, which were Cheetah, Puma, Jaguar, Panther, and Tiger, definitely demonstrate this look.
We have been secretly, for the last 18 months, designing a completely new user interface. And that new user interface builds on Apple's legacy and carries it into the next century. And we call that new user interface Aqua, because it's liquid. One of the design goals was when you saw it, you wanted to lick it.
This era also seemed to favor the color white, with a lot of their products and branding sporting the look, such as the G iMac product line, as well as the polycarbonate MacBooks. Abstract patterns and swirls were also favored. The whole vibe for this era follows the same trend that many 2000s era technology-related things followed, where things feel futuristic yet dated at the same time. Another key product from this era were the iPods, which had a huge impact on culture and the company. And besides physical products, the software and services from this era were iLife, iWork, and .Mac. My previous video, Apple's Forgotten Software, talks more about these if you're not familiar with them. The Aqua Era is a big fan favorite. But like everything, the Aqua Era came to an end in roughly 2007, ushering in a new era, what I call the Skeuomorphic Era, roughly spanning the years 2007 to 2013. While the Aqua Era was slightly more abstract, the Skeuomorphic Era lived up to its name and presented us with a hyper-realistic and, in my opinion, very elegant branding, overall theme, and especially UI design. Hallmarks of this era was its favor toward brushed metal, realistic textures, shadows, darker tones, and, of course, skeuomorphism, where the UI mimicked real-life objects and situations. On account of this, nature and real life seemed to be a focal point of Apple's overall design language and brand identity. And while the Aqua Era was futuristic and playful, I think that the Skeuomorphic Era sought to be more thoughtful and classy. Also unlike Aqua, the Skeuomorphic Era seemed to favor black and metal. This can be seen in their iMac and MacBook lines, as well as the then newly released iPhones and iPads. The skeuomorphic UI of this era is also extremely iconic and beloved. From the first iterations of iOS and iPadOS to macOS 10 Leopard, Snow Leopard, Lion, and Mountain Lion. The extra software and services offered during this time period include iLife, iWork, and Mobile Meet, a cloud service before iCloud. Additional products besides the iPhone and iPad introduced during this era was the iPod Touch and the Apple TV. The Skeuomorphic Era might be equally as nostalgic and beloved as the Aqua Era, and it certainly has an iconic look. But just like a new Apple era started shortly after Steve Jobs rejoined the company, a new era started shortly after his death in 2011. Thus came a new era, spanning roughly the years 2013 to 2017, which I call the Flat and Fun Era. I'm not sure how accurate this is, but I largely associate this era with Tim Cook, as with Jobs' passing, the future of Apple was now overseen by his vision. The overall vibe of this era featured fun colors, a flat design, minimal texture, and an overall sense of brightness. I have a hunch that, like many design trends, this era was perhaps a reaction to the serious and skeuomorphic era before it. During this era, iOS went through by far the most drastic design change the operating system has ever seen, iOS 7. Apple's hardware also went through a major redesign with the iPhone 6. Macs were less affected, still going with the metal look, and OS X, despite adopting the new California landmark naming scheme, was much less changed. In the middle of the Flat and Fun era, the Apple Watch was released, ushering in a brand new way of looking at health and technology, as well as being a new key product for the company. And although iCloud was technically released at the end of the previous era, the Flat and Fun era actually saw iCloud go mainstream and become a huge success. However, iWork, and especially iLife, were less emphasized. The Flat and Fun era doesn't have as clear of an ending as previous ones, but I marked the transition year in about 2017, when iOS really modernized and cleaned up a bit with iOS 11. So, although it could probably be seen as just a part 2 to the Flat and Fun era, I think that it's distinct enough to be its own thing, and so I introduce the no-nonsense era. If you watched my Android version of this video, you know that the no-nonsense era was also an Android era. And interestingly, if you compare each era of Android and Apple against each other, you'll notice that they follow very similar design trends and time spans, which makes a lot of sense considering the companies constantly compete with each other and feed off of each other's ideas. It's also debatable whether Apple and Android were influenced by or set the design trends of the current time, as they were also very much in line with those. Anyways, during the no-nonsense era, things felt really polished and modernized, and it felt like Apple finally solidified itself as a very mature and established company. Going off of that, this era featured a very full Apple ecosystem, pretty much the one that we're familiar with today. We had the new HomePod, the iPads with Apple Pencil, and of course, the release of AirPods. It was also during this era that the iPhone and Apple Watch design language modernized, with bezel-less screens on both devices. This era also seemed to put a focus on a more rounded design language, demonstrated in the changes seen in their hardware and software. During this era, macOS saw no significant changes besides the name change from OS X to macOS. Mac hardware, on the other hand, got a substantial upgrade via the polarizing touch bar. The shortest of all the eras, spanning little more than 3 years, the no-nonsense era ended in around 2020, bringing in the future of Apple and what I call the current era. It's hard for me to really put a name to an Apple aesthetic before the era is actually completed, but I'll do my best to put together the vibes I get so far. As of this new era, it seems like Apple is starting the decade off strong with brighter and more playful colors, as well as less outright nature and a more abstract look. You'll also notice that Dimension is coming back a bit in a new way, at least in Big Sur. But besides macOS, iOS has also seen some substantial upgrades. Fitting for the new fun colors and design language of Apple's hardware, Apple's software seems to be taking on new modes of customization never seen before. Like I mentioned about a previous era, I think that as a reaction to the uniformity of the no-nonsense era, a hallmark of this new era is customizability and individuality. You can see this present itself with iOS 14's widgets, and further home screen customization, as well as the new lock screen just introduced in iOS 16. It's hard to say more about this era since we're only at the beginning, but I have noticed that another characteristic of this era is the inclusion of services as a bigger part of Apple's business model. From Apple Music to TV Plus to Apple Arcade, News Plus, Fitness Plus, iCloud, and even Apple Card, Apple offers by far the most subscription-based services in the history of the company. There's even a rumor floating around that Apple is planning a subscription-based iPhone renting service, though I'm not sure how credible that leak really is. And that's pretty much it so far for the current era. From the eye candy of the Aqua Era, the elegance of the Skeuomorphic Era, the spunkiness of the Flat and Fun Era, the efficiency of the no-nonsense era, and the mystery and excitement surrounding the future of Apple, each era is memorable in its own way, acting as a sort of time capsule reflecting the zeitgeist of the company as well as the world during each era's time span.